All right, thank you all for joining us today. We got a lot of participants, so we'll go ahead and get started a couple minutes late here, but welcome everyone. My name is Elliot Nethercutt. I'm a Principal Regulatory Policy Specialist with the Center for Partnerships and Innovation within NARUC, National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners. We have an interesting topic, a terrific moderator and an esteemed panel of experts for today's innovation webinar. It's drawn a lot of attention. We're really excited about that. Before I introduce our moderator, just want to make a couple of announcements. Just some background on NARUC. It's founded in 1889. It is a nonprofit organization. We're dedicated to representing state public service commissions who regulate power, water, telecommunications, and energy and transportation. NARUC's members include all 50 states, the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. And again, our mission is to serve the public interest by improving the quality and effectiveness of public utility regulation. A little more about the Center for Partnerships and Innovation. We seek to build relationships, develop resources, and deliver training and other information sharing like this one to our members and to the industry at large. CPI is funded by a cooperative agreement through the U.S. Department of Energy and the U.S. Department of Commerce's National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST. NARUC conducts work across 5 key areas. We encourage you to visit our website to learn a little bit more about what we do and the resources that we make available to our members and others. I'm going to go quick on this because we did start a bit late. We've got a couple of events coming up that are of note, most notably our Winter Policy Summit in Washington, D.C. This is the second to last day to register. The online registration closes tomorrow, so I encourage you to register for that if you can make it. Otherwise, I'll point you to our website for additional information on these events, so we can go ahead and move to our moderator, Commissioner Paradis. Stacey Paradis was appointed to the Illinois Commerce Commission by Governor J.B. Pritzker on April 3rd of 2023 to serve a 5-year term. She serves on NARUC's Committee on Energy, Resources, and the Environment and was named to the NARUC Natural Gas Resource Planning Task Force. Ms. Paradis brings to the Commission 25 years of experience in government relations, public affairs, and nonprofit management. Commissioner Paradis, first, thank you so much for, again, for moderating today's panel, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here today. I'm excited for the discussion that we're going to have. So if any of you have known me or know that I used to in my previous life, would wax on a little bit, but now in my commissioner role, especially as an unconfirmed commissioner, I'm not going to do that today. But let me do a quick introduction of everyone here, just as a reminder of why we're here today. I'm going to go through all the speakers and do their bios first, give them a chance to talk. I think we've encouraged people to go through the chat for questions. I'll have some questions as well, but I'm really excited for our discussion today. So just as a reminder, while we're all here, rate design for 24/7 carbon electricity. As described, energy buyers, both public and private, are increasingly setting targets to procure 100% of their electricity from carbon-free sources every hour of the day. The transition to timestamp renewable energy certificates and hourly matching can provide credible proof of 24/7 carbon-free energy procurement, while also delivering an important price signal for the energy storage and flexibility. Thoughtful rate design is necessary to enable utilities to offer hourly matching programs to the organizations that are demanding them without adverse effects on non-participating ratepayers. So I'm excited to have everyone here today. Let me go through the order of the bios will be the order that folks are speaking. So first will be Dr. Carl Linville. He's a principal with the Regulatory Assistance Project. Based out of Davis, California. And at RAP, Carl focuses on power sector planning and regulatory and market reforms that facilitate low carbon futures. His current projects address electricity rate and tariff design, distributed energy resource integration and compensation, wholesale market design, and Western interconnection regional market reforms. Our next speaker will be Ted Thomas. He's a founding partner, Energize Strategy, and a former chair of the Arkansas Public Service Commission. During his time on the commission, he served in a variety of leadership roles, including president of OPSI, chair of the Improved Resource Availability Task Force, which was charged with implementation of policies adopted by SPP in response to Winter Storm Uri, as well as the Federal State Joint Task Force for Transmission. Following the chairman will be Katie. Oh, Katie, I'm so sorry. I knew it and I've forgotten. Sororier? I think I did that. Oh, so close. As VP of Granular Procurement Solutions for Level 10 Energy, the industry's leading provider of renewable transaction infrastructure. She leads the business strategy and development behind Level 10's granular certificate solutions, designed to accelerate clean energy transactions and decarbonize at scale. Finally, our final speaker is Sean Bennett, Director of Clean Energy for the White House Council of Environmental Quality. He's a clean energy expert who has recently been involved in the U.S. Air Force to meet requirements for the world's largest energy consumer. He has led previous utility and policy work for FERC to support integration of clean energy in the wholesale energy markets. So with that, I want to turn it over to Carl, who will be our first speaker and to get us started.
Thank you, Commissioner. It's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you, Elliot, for putting up the slides. Next slide, please. So RAP initiated a project in 2023, about a year ago now, to try to identify principles for designing 24/7 carbon-free electricity transition tariffs well. Now, that's a real mouthful. First of all, 24/7 carbon-free tariffs seek to match a customer's hourly demand every hour of the year with a carbon-free electricity resource that exactly meets that demand. The word transition is put in here, transition tariffs, to recognize that many places are not going to be able to jump to offering a tariff that provides that hourly matching every hour of the year. So, but it is possible to transition toward that. So what we're considering broadly and what we considered broadly in our project over the last year were 24/7 carbon-free electricity tariffs that could transition us towards a true 24/7 portfolio for those customers that would like it. Since we're a little bit short on time, I'm going to leave what's noted on this slide for your consideration after the fact. I'll just say we had about 140 stakeholders participate in 7 meetings over the course of last year, consulting with us, making presentations on various topics related to 24/7. We greatly appreciate their participation. We had about 60 core members that did a lot of work. We will be unveiling our summary report that I'll be describing today at NARUC, and you'll be able to find it at our table at NARUC in Washington, D.C. Next slide, please. So why has 24/7 emerged as an important issue right now? Well, first of all, there are policy reasons. Many states, many utilities have adopted 100% carbon-free energy or 100% clean energy goals. So this is a potential tool that can help meet that. Also, there's a need for a complementary tool that addresses high emissions times and high emissions places. Most of our policies in the past were not targeted at particular times and places, but were targeted over the course of the year. So you might have, over the course of the year, paid for carbon-free energy for 8,760 hours, but you might have many hours during that year where most of your supply was still coming from an emitting resource. Secondly, in order to get to this carbon matching, hourly carbon-free resource matching with demand, different resources are needed than are normally purchased or procured when you have an annual matching situation. Examples include things like greater renewable diversity, bringing carbon-free energy in hours where there's not very much carbon-free energy now. Storage, whether it's electricity storage or energy storage, transmission and load flexibility, and so forth. And then finally, a good number of cities or states have recognized that there are large commercial or industrial customers, the federal government, that are very interested in having a 24/7 carbon-free portfolio. And so it becomes a matter of economic development for that city or that state to figure out how to offer through the utility a 24/7 option. Next slide, please. So I've pretty much already said this, but I'm just going to say it again one more time for emphasis. Annual matching tariffs, annual matching green energy tariffs have been very helpful in attracting carbon-free energy into our fleets around the country. It's a fabulous policy. However, it does not precisely bring resources that deliver carbon-free electricity in all hours or in all places. And so therefore, we aren't getting all the investments that we need to truly transition to a 24/7 portfolio. Hourly matching creates the signal, creates the accountability, and creates the signal that that ensures that you know how much of your resource is coming from a carbon-free energy resource in every hour of the year. Next slide, please. So through our stakeholder process, we identified 5 fundamentals that are important to arriving at a tariff and a rate design that it's fair and effective. First of all, our first fundamental that we identified is the need to integrate transition tariff investments with ongoing utility planning. Does this mean that you have to wait until you design a planning process that can seamlessly integrate transition tariffs? No. You can take steps towards expanding your carbon-free hourly fleet immediately. You don't need to wait for a planning process. However, to fully reach the potential that you want to achieve, that 100% carbon-free electricity matching at least cost and with reliability, you are going to want to integrate that planning. So we focus on that. The second thing we focus on our report is the need to ensure accurate hourly emissions tracking and verification. You should get what you pay for. If a customer pays for 24/7 carbon-free energy, carbon-free electricity, then they should know that they're getting 24/7 carbon-free electricity. The only way you can ensure that is if you have an improved tracking and verification platform from what exists typically today. Third, as I said previously, complementary investments that address those hours and places where high emissions persist are necessary. So designing tariffs with an eye toward attracting and consolidating capital into those investments, whether they be in resources or in infrastructure, is very important. Fourth, then taking the step of allocating costs and creating a rate design that treats non-participants and participants in the tariff well, is fair to all of them, but also includes some deliberate consideration of carbon-free electricity grid needs on an hour-by-hour basis and aligns that with pricing and compensation, so that basically there's a price signal where there's not enough carbon-free electricity in a place or a time. There's a signal that lets people know that that's an underserved need. And then finally, integrating those operating systems to implement hourly matching at the distribution utility and in your regional market is important. There are a lot of aspects to this. I'm not going to get into the details, but one very quick example is that aggregated load flexibility, virtual power plants, these kind of resources on a local basis can be part of your 24/7 carbon-free electricity portfolio. But in most places, we don't really have the operating system practices that allow those things to come into being quickly and effectively. Next slide, please. And this is my last slide. So those 5 fundamentals are reflected by the 5 dots on the left side. This kind of beneficial combination, mutually beneficial combination of fundamentals is intended to drive 24/7 investment for carbon-free electricity. If you look at the graphic in the lower right, On the left axis, you have carbon emissions. On the right axis, you have incremental investment. The two dotted lines represent emissions profiles. The top dotted line, the dark blue one, represents a business as usual conceptual case. The dotted green line represents the improvement in emissions reduction that comes from implementing 24/7. And the upward sloping arrow in the turquoise color represents those incremental investments that are made over time to drive emissions down and drive the portfolio of carbon-free resources and carbon-free infrastructure up. So that's our project. Our paper is going to come out at NARUC. We look forward to talking to you more about this. Thank you, Stacey. I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Carl. That was a great start. Ted, I believe you're next.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for being here, and thank you for having me. Next slide, please. How I got involved in this was actually a little bit of luck that happened at NARUC 2 summers ago. I ran into a friend, Tanaj Denora, who was actually working on the executive office of the president on 24/7 for federal load through working with the GSA, which is the federal agency that handles their electric load. And we just chatted about what we were doing. And he told me that he was working on this stuff for the federal government. And I happened to be working with Entergy, a large utility in Arkansas, on an economic development project in which a steel mill had a customer that wanted to do time match. So they were working through some of these issues on time match, and I put them together. And I wish the utilities always did what I suggested. In this instance, they did. And as a result, we had the first 24/7. And as Carl says, it's a transition tariff. There might be hours when there isn't anything available, particularly in the evening, given Entergy's reliance on solar. So that happened. We were first on that, and happy to do that. The next step that happened was a tariff. Next slide, please. This is Entergy's tariff. I will briefly hit a few of the key policies determinations in terms of how they did it. The first thing is it's a REC tariff. Basically, you unbundle the environmental attributes from the energy in the form of a REC that is time matched. How they handled existing nuclear resources was that those are allocated, so you can't buy the unallocated ones, and this was negotiated for an additionality thing, so that you're driving new investment, not just allocating existing resources. Basically, you take your load, the nuclear generation for the full year, and then you proportion it out among all the customers, similar to how you would compute a demand charge, although all of this is on the energy side. And it's important to note the fuel savings remain with everybody. That's a system benefit. So often when you look at a solar resource, you're going to put the fixed cost in rates, and then your benefits come on the fuel savings side. So the fuel savings are retained by all customers. It's just the environmental benefit that you strip off. Next slide, please. The time matching that Carl discussed is a key policy concept, and was a key policy concept discussed in terms of hydrogen when the Department of the Treasury, working with DOE, issued its guidance. Now, if you don't care about hydrogen, there are reasons I think that you should care about this that we'll get into next. There are 3 key policy that were discussed in the debate in terms of the hydrogen guidance. One is additionality. You want new stuff, not to allocate existing stuff. Second was an hourly time match that we've hit. And then third is deliverability. So we're moving beyond this concept that you can buy a REC in Maine and apply it to something far, far away, like on the West Coast. And so these concepts were adopted in the hydrogen guidance. The deliverability zones are basically the RTO boundaries, with the non-RTO areas having their own zone, with one exception. MISO North and MISO South are in separate zones. Next slide, please. This is the Treasury guidance. This is just a reference if you want to see the same thing I'm looking at. So the next slide, we'll get into a detail on this. The hourly tracking system called for by the hydrogen guidance does not yet exist, as they candidly admit in the guidance. And for this reason, for 3 years, you can just do annual time match. You don't have to do the hourly time match. So basically, during this 3 years, they're going to develop this system, which will control the flow of a very significant amount of federal subsidies. And where should you start? Well, when the RAP report comes out, that will be a great starting point, because the challenges and need for this is what that a significant part of that report covers. Also, what will happen is you give these zones, these deliverability zones, there'll be separate prices in each zone. So, for example, your hourly load shape, the way that wind drives prices in SPP, will be different in, say, MISO South, where there's more solar. Now, one thing I think that they'll change about this guidance is that they'll permit if there's a contractual obligation to deliver it to a zone from one zone to another, I think they'll allow, and this is speculation on my part because it just makes sense, that if there's a contractual obligation, say, to deliver from SPP to MISO, then you could get credit for the hourly time matched REC in MISO if there's a contractual obligation to deliver it. Otherwise, there'll be different prices and different incentives in each zone. Next slide, please. This is a rhetorical question. This is something that I actually think will happen. Will the time-matched EAC system developed for the hydrogen program become the official currency of the energy transition? And this is because when you look at corporate buying, it's kind of amorphous. It's just supply and demand, where folks work out their own deals according to their own expectations of what they think how they basically achieve their own voluntary goals. So there's no uniformity and there's no standards. What I think the EAC system developed for the hydrogen tax credit will provide uniformity, and it will provide a standardized approach to be used in corporate voluntary contracting. And I also think that it will inform the next generation of state renewable portfolio standards if they move towards time matching. And of course, the uniformity will help folks know that what they're trying to achieve and somebody else is trying to achieve, that they're being measured by the same standards. So, and that's speculation on my part. But as this system develops, I think that state RPSs and contracts will gravitate towards that system. Now, how will that work? And Carl mentioned VPPs, which I think are a great concept. As long as you're matching hourly, you can do DER stuff, aggregate those into VPPs, and if this does become a national standard, you would qualify under that standard. Of course, in that world, your EE programs need to be measured by the hour as well. So, as Carl said, this is an incentive program that will drive investment in the hours that are most hard to reach with 24/7. And thank you, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Ted. Katie, we'll turn it over to you.
It looks like actually we've got Sean's slides next up.
Okay. Well then, Sean, I guess that means you're up.
Thank you, Stacey. And sorry, Katie, I'm looking forward to your presentation coming next. Thank you. Really excited to be on this panel today. Just a little bit more about myself. I report directly to the Federal Chief Sustainability Officer and responsible for getting all federal facilities on clean energy and coordinating all the different agencies within the federal government, from the Department of Defense to the Department of State, Commerce, all of them, all to achieve 100% and using our buying power as largest buyer of electricity in the country to help drive decarbonization. Next slide, please. So the Biden administration has set an ambitious policy objective to full grid decarbonization over the next 10, 15 years. And we have a number of legislative achievements, from the bipartisan nutrition law to the Inflation Reduction Act. They're going to really accelerate our progress towards getting to a fully decarbonized grid. But they won't get us all the way there. I think that's fairly well recognized. And so to help fill that gap in part, the president issued his federal sustainability plan in late 2021, calling for the federal government to achieve net zero for emissions for all its operations by 2050. And that has a clean energy component to it, or carbon-free electricity component to that. So next slide. So the carbon-free electricity goals within the federal sustainability plan through the executive order has sort of three parts. First, it challenges us to get to 100% annually matched carbon-free electricity, so matching our consumption to carbon-free electricity on an annual basis by 2030. Second, but that includes a 50% hourly matched target, or 24/7 target. And then we're also challenged to and charged to go out and maximize opportunities to deploy clean generation and battery storage using our federal real property across the country. So we view these goals as complementary, particularly on the annually matched goals. We see them as helping accelerate the deployment of low-cost wind and solar. That's the easiest way to meet those goals. And then the hourly match goal is really going to drive, as our previous speakers have pointed to, investments in battery storage and in clean, firm technologies, if you will, from nuclear, geothermal, flexible demand, such as virtual power plants, all of that are going to be needed for those hard to decarbonize hours where wind and solar may not be fully available. Next slide. So despite being the largest buyer of electricity in the country, we do so almost entirely at the retail level. And so what that means in practice is that 3/4 of our electricity consumption in the United States is through our vertically integrated utilities. And so we're really focusing on engaging with our regulated or vertically integrated utilities. And we've made public announcements that we're working together with utilities such as Xcel, Southern Company, TVA, for example, and that in total, all of these agreements that we've announced publicly will allow us to achieve 100% carbon-free electricity across 16 states for all of our federal facilities in 16 states, and move us on an annually matched basis in aggregate for the federal government from a little less than 40% carbon-free electricity to just under 50%. So we're really excited about that. But we're also pursuing that the hourly or 24/7 goal as well. And as Ted Thomas pointed out earlier, with the Energy Arkansas tariff, that was actually our first public announcement of partnership with the utility. We made that announcement at COP in 2022, at the end of 2022. And that led eventually to a tariff that was filed in 2023 and that was approved by the commission in Arkansas. And we have signing up all of our federal agencies in that territory. We have almost 300 gigawatt hours of load in that territory. And I'm really excited and believe that the investments we're making through this tariff are going to spur investments in new technology and innovation. And importantly, this tariff is available not just to us, but to all commercial industrial customers, which we're really excited about. And that's different than maybe some other typical green tariffs, which are capped and limited by a megawatt amount. This is available to all customers, commercial and industrial customers. So this is going to benefit not just federal facilities and Arkansas businesses and other Arkansas businesses, but it will create new jobs from clean energy construction and result in cleaner air in Arkansas, the state of Arkansas. But just stepping back for a second, when we first reach out to utilities and start talking about our goals and how we can partner and work with them to achieve our goals, it really kind of depends on the situation the utility is facing on their systems. For those utilities that may have lower penetrations of carbon-free electricity today on their system, we tend to start more with a focus on our annually matched goals and how do we really help to accelerate the deployment of wind and solar, which are cost-effective to begin with. And then we'll start the conversation on 24/7, but in some cases, utilities are not as familiar with that concept. They're becoming more familiar. And so just talking through that and maybe starting to get an understanding of where we may stand in terms of our baseline today, in terms of how much we're matched on an hourly basis with existing generation. For other utilities that either do have higher penetrations of carbon-free electricity in the system, or they have ambitious goals to get there in the near future, they're probably doing all they can already to accelerate the deployment of wind and solar on their systems. And they're not really interested in that, but they are interested in our 24/7 goals. And they see the need for clean, firm, for battery storage and clean, firm technologies they're going to need on their system. They see that coming down the pipeline, and they're very much interested in partnering with us to kind of figure out win-win solutions through new tariff development. Next slide. So a picture's worth 1,000 words, and so I think this picture is really helpful in my mind to kind of really break down and how a tariff might operate. So if you're looking at this graph here of just an illustrative 24/7 tariff, so a way it could be designed, you'll see there at the bottom of the graph in blue is the existing carbon-free electricity that's already in the grid mix that the utility already has in the system today. And in this case, there's a lot of nuclear in this illustrative utility. So it's sort of base load, and it's flatlined across all hours of the day from 0 to 24. And then layering in on top of that in the green, you'll have new wind and solar investments, the kind of investments you'll see in typical green tariffs that utility customers can take advantage of. And so those areas where the blue and the green together in any 1 hour is less than our aggregate demand, which is that black line, are those hours where we're leaning on the fossil fuel resources of the utility in the system and are not fully matched hour to hour. So this gets to the point that Carl mentioned at the top about transition tariffs. We're not expecting to get to 100% on day one. And so first we want to baseline and understand where we are today and evaluate our options. And so from a tariff design perspective, a couple things to kind of think about here. One is we as a customer, we have a lot of facilities typically in any one large utility service territory, and we don't have a good handle on our own metering. We have some metering in place, and we're trying to do better, but we don't have a good sense of our own hourly consumption. And so we're relying on the utility to aggregate our consumption and track our hourly demand from hour to hour and tell us that. And then on the supply side, in order to make a credible claim that we're buying and consuming this clean energy, this carbon-free electricity, we are relying on the RECs, or the energy attribute certificates, the EACs. For those, that's a broader term than REC, because it includes non-renewable attributes such as nuclear. We're looking at our utility supplier to have the RECs, so the EACs, retired or generated and retired on an hourly basis for us, so that we can match our consumption to the generation. Also, when we think about the existing CFE, I think Ted alluded to this a little earlier, we want to make sure we're not making any other customer dirtier. That's a really important principle here. So we're going to only take our load ratio share of those existing resources from the utility and their rate base that we're paying for, like all other customers, and allocate that portion through the RECs and the ACs to us. On the green side, on the new solar and wind investments, that's where we're going to be paying more, if you will, than we would for just paying the nominal fee that we expect to pay for the existing stuff, because we already paid for that. So we're just asking the utility to, for a nominal fee, track and retire those EACs for the existing CFE RECs and EACs. But for the new stuff, we expect to be helping support the investment in those resources so that we'll be paying more. In the energy case that Ted brought up, it is a sort of a flat volumetric fee, and so that's typical. Well, in green tariffs, to pay a flat volumetric or capacity fee. I think as a customer, we're interested in rate designs where there would be a series of bills and credits, where we pay for, help support the new investments in new clean generation, but we also receive some of the benefits or credits, if you will, in terms of some of the avoided costs. So that's something that we're pushing for when we're talking with utilities. And then maybe I'll just close by saying the important piece here then is, once we've talked about existing and we're tracking existing and we've looked at opportunities for wind and solar, then those gaps is where the 24/7 tariff really can kind of come in and really target opportunities to make additional investments in the battery storage, in flexible demand like virtual power plants, or other clean firm technologies to fill in those gaps where the gray still remains under that black line. And that's really one of the real powers, real opportunities with a 24/7 tariff. Next slide. So in closing, I would just say, welcome to the Q&A, and for the regulators and their utilities out in the audience today, I would ask you to consider the benefits of a 24/7 tariff, both to consumers and to help meet system needs going forward. For the customer side that may be out there in the audience today, I'd ask you to consider that 24/7 can sound daunting to get engaged on, but there are some simple steps that you can take in terms of working with your utilities to even to start baselining where you are today, to understand that gap between the amount of CFE on an hour that is supplying you versus how much your demand is. And so there's lots of opportunities to get started. Now, I'll turn it back over to Stacey.
Great. Thank you, Sean. Katie, we'll let you wrap it up and then we'll have questions.
Great. All right. Well, let me say first and foremost, one of the reasons that we're speaking today at Level 10 on behalf of the Granular Certificate Trading Alliance is that we need and value NARUC's support in this transition towards hourly matching. And what we're really excited to talk about is what we see as another new tool to help accelerate decarbonization and ensure, as Carl talked about, accurate hourly emissions tracking and verification. So let's dive on in. So some of you may be familiar with Level 10, some may not. Our mission is to accelerate the clean energy transition. And so back in 2018, we launched the first marketplace for power purchase agreements, PPAs, which is now the largest in the world. And why I mention that is it's given us a front row seat to watching and being part of the boom in voluntary PPAs from corporate buyers. And we've heard from both buyers and sellers who are serving them that we need new tools, tools that are going to enable us to understand, as Sean very eloquently was highlighting, the gaps that we have today around carbon-free energy. And so this alliance has been a year plus in the making and was announced formally on December 14th, 2023. And what we are looking to do is to build on an existing standard, the energy tag standard for granular certificates, which bring in time and location to help understand where there are these gaps today and what we can do to move that forward. So you can see our members include AES, Constellation, Google, and Microsoft, and we're working in partnership with the Intercontinental Exchange to develop transaction infrastructure so that granular certificates can be bought and sold and tracked. So with that, next slide. This is just a visual to recap why this matters. So as Sean was highlighting, we understand that today signing power purchase agreements is not going to meet every hour of the day. And today, absent a granular certificate, it requires vastly over procuring, which is tremendously expensive and an inefficient way of achieving a 24/7 goal. Next slide. So the untapped potential here is how to redirect supply to when and where it's needed most. And I think that the unique challenge we have on this is that today our accounting tools for the environmental attributes of clean energy don't give us quite enough resolution. The metaphor I might offer is that my sister always says when she gets new glasses, she's suddenly able to see the leaves on the tree. And I think what we are looking to do when it comes to our energy procurement is have those glasses so that we have that additional detail to make clear the time and location when we have those gaps in portfolios. That's something that's needed. So next slide. The opportunity with this additional clarity is that we then have demand signals to help incentivize where we have this gaps and bring new technologies to bear. And from a definition standpoint, when we talk about granular certificates, they're an energy attribute certificate that include time and location and can refer to a variety of technology types: solar, wind, hydro, nuclear, even storage, renewably charged storage. So next slide. What we're looking to do here then is create a liquid and transparent marketplace for these granular certificates. What that means is that energy buyers can easily source carbon-free energy that's generated around the clock. So where they have those gaps, they will be able to trade based on their preferred technology types, whether they prefer solar and wind, hydro, nuclear, and that from an excess side where we may have overproduction of hours, that excess carbon-free energy can be sold. And so portfolio gaps can be met in those smaller blocks and hours, which provides a more cost-effective solution than just simply over-procuring. And ultimately creating price signals for how carbon-free energy can be dispatched at every hour of the day. So next slide. So when I started out, I mentioned that we are looking to launch a trading platform in partnership with ICE. So later this year, we're looking to launch our first pilot, where buyers and sellers will be able to participate in auctions for two types of market. The first would be a forward market. So knowing where you've got big gaps in your portfolio, those known holes, how can you go out and through an auction procure a supply to meet that? And then an after the fact spot market, where the granular certificates for those times and locations have been minted and people can go around to fill in where they have particular gaps in their portfolio. There is certainly a lot in here, but this is just a high level picture of what we're looking to do. Last slide. So stepping back for a moment, when the Granular Certificate Trading Alliance came together, we identified 7 shared goals that are informing our approach to market development for granular certificates. And what I bolded over here on the right side is number 3, ensuring environmental legitimacy in these trades, transparency, and no double counting. And I highlight that because we certainly recognize that this group is quite familiar with all of the questions and challenges even today between interactions on compliance and voluntary markets. And now we have a fantastic opportunity to introduce time and location for greater resolution. And that also adds 8760 hours of complexity into the equation to be managed. And so we certainly appreciate this as both tremendous opportunity and work. You'll also notice on the left-hand side that we're working to build industry-wide support for this transition to granular certificates. And these are a list of some of the supporters who have already signed on in saying that, yes, we agree, with these principles and what is happening moving forward with granular certificates. So it brings me to what is the actual ask to NARUC members today on behalf of the GC Trading Alliance. As I mentioned first, we need and value your support in the transition to granular certificates to support hourly matching. We know that registry readiness for hourly is critical. We also appreciate that there's a myriad of priorities that tracking systems are managing: state RPS compliance programs, cybersecurity concerns, addressing customer satisfaction improvement opportunities, Those are already on the plate. As a hopeful pragmatist, I appreciate that a transition to granular certificates requires significant work, and it's possible. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie, and thank you to all the speakers. There's been some activity in the Q&A chat, but Ted and Carl have been busy little panelists answering those. So let me kick off a couple of them to start. The first one, let me do to Katie and to Carl. Is this really only for the big companies? Is this something that's really only needed for the Googles and the Microsofts of the world and the federal government? Or so let's answer that part, and then let's talk about then the benefits that come to your traditional residential ratepayers or low income folks. How is this going to work its way through the system?
Katie, do you want to go first? You're not muted though.
Thanks, Carl. From our perspective, while we may see early adopters come from large organizations, we believe that this is part of a broader transition for greater resolution and in reporting that benefits all. And Carl, I imagine you may have some additional thoughts on all of the work as how this then translates into tariffs.
Yeah, well, what I would say is that we already have local governments, cities, some places that have adopted 24/7 carbon-free electricity goals for either for their city government or for their locality as a whole. There's some CCAs in California that are implementing 24/7 carbon-free procurement solutions. So that is to serve all of their customers, not just their commercial customers. So I think there's broad interest, and there ultimately will be an opportunity for everyone to participate who wants to.
Okay. Let me add one other question on there as we talk about what this is going to mean, how we're going to prop up the system. What are the first principles of rate design that are going to be the most important as the state implements to a transition tariff?
Well, is that for me?
I'll let you jump on that one first, Carl.
Okay. Yeah, so, you may know that RAP has written a 370-page cost allocation manual. Behind that, that end of the day determination of rate design is the question of allocating all of the costs that the utility has incurred to provide the various services that it provides. So I think in this case, the most important principle for me for rate design is to make sure we get the costs allocated properly, counted for and allocated properly, so that when we get to the stage of designing the rates, we're working from a sound foundation of cost allocation.
Okay. Any other comments on that one from any of the other speakers, or ready to go on the next question?
And it's also important to allocate the benefits. I think that is encompassed in Carl's answer. You want an alignment of both the costs and the benefits. Thank you.
Absolutely. And Ted, let me follow up with you. All of us at the states are always looking to see who's out there first so we can kind of learn from them. What are the states and what are the utilities that we probably would want to look to? And Sean, you might have comments on this as we kind of consider what our options are.
The tariff and the individual that helped Entergy design the tariff also worked with the RAP stakeholder process, whose name I cannot recall, but I think Paul probably recalls it. So even though Arkansas is no longer first, a lot of these really difficult policy questions came up. And like how they dealt with additionality was that you can take your allocation of existing nuclear, but the unallocated nuclear, you can't buy that. Would be seen as a shortcut. That hit a lot of them. And another thing that's a little bit surprising is Southern Company is actually taking a different approach, but they've capped it. It's basically you can buy your own You do your own generation, and all the benefits and costs of that flow back through to you. Now, of course, if they did that on everything, they would have a retail access program. So they have some pretty severe caps. But looking at that as an alternative with Entergy, they've kind of stripped off the environmental benefits and doing them separate. With Southern, you're really, if you're under the cap and eligible, which I think the cap is going to be driving quick, for lack of a better term. You're taking on all of it. You're taking on the energy benefit, the capacity benefit, and everything. So to me, those are kind of two schools of thought that you can start from when trying to think about the policy.
Okay, that's helpful.
Yeah,
Sean,
just
oh,
to
go ahead, Carl.
just to throw Neil Fisher, I think is the one you were trying to
Yes.
Neil Fisher with Northbridge Group is a very helpful resource.
Yes, and a lot of these RAP workshops are on video. So you can find on the RAP YouTube page, he gave a presentation, Southern gave a presentation, Entergy gave. There were a lot of experts, some California community choice aggregators gave presentations, some folks on the contracting side, because we do this over in regulated world. Well, over in retail access world, they're trying to do this through matching of resources and contracts. Some of those folks presented too. So there's a whole lot of presentations on YouTube that you can look at, that, and I'm sure there'll be an indexing back to some of that in the report itself. Thank you.
Thanks. And then Sean, I believe you talked about a relationship you guys have with Excel.
Yeah, so two things. One, just in terms of the available tariffs that we're aware of, certainly the Entergy Arkansas is one. Ted, the Southern Company and Georgia Power, their ATC, or around the clock cares tariff, is their 24/7 version as well. And it's different. There's a higher cost upfront and a longer commitment. So it's a different structure than the one in Entergy Arkansas. And then we're also aware of one in the Duke Carolinas, where they have one. And then, as I mentioned, those utilities that are further along in their CFE penetrations, or they have ambitious goals, they are considering it. They haven't found anything, but there's certainly been conversations around that. I also want to give a plug to Northbridge as well, to Neil Fisher and some of his colleagues, who were really super helpful when we were having those initial conversations with Entergy Arkansas, and sort of bridging the gap between the customer conversation, the customer way of talking and needs, and the utility, and kind of figuring out those solutions that kind of meet both needs and get a viable tariff in place. Over.
Great, thank you. I'm going to turn to the Q&As in the chat here real quick. So if the other speakers want to look, you can see those. The first one, I'm going to leave this open. It seems that state alignment around EACs is a really important issue to align with all sorts of federal and corporate clean energy policies and objectives. What do PUC commissioners need to know to ensure a national seamless transition to 24/7?
The two key things I think you should track, as Katie referenced, there's an effort to do this on what you would call a voluntary basis for the corporations that want to participate. Watch how that's developing, and then I think that this hydrogen guidance, since the federal government is going to wield the gavel and say this is how it should happen, but watch how this stuff develop, because that's what your policy you want. You're going to want it to latch on something that someone's developing. So I would follow these things where folks are trying to develop this both on a voluntary basis. And of course, this is why I think the hydrogen guidance is so relevant even to non-hydrogen issues, because when the feds say this is how we think you should do it, that's going to create a center of gravity that's going to inform contracting, and it's going to inform state RPS goals, and it will be uniform. It's like the same thing that happened when we went from states issuing their currencies to one federal currency. It makes it standardized where everybody has confidence in the system. And of course, that relates to how you do double tracking. That's the main thing I would do, is how track the development of your accounting system, so that's in place when you want to bring a policy to tie to it.
No, that's very helpful. Sorry, go ahead, Sean.
Sorry, I was just to add the registry systems in place that are offering hourly tracking of RECs and EACs is only available primarily in MISO and PJM. And so some of the other registry systems, I think as Ted pointed out, in the hydrogen production tax credit rulemaking aren't there yet. And it's not a technology issue necessarily. The technology, it requires some investments, but it's relatively straightforward. It's the governance around who are the governing bodies for these registry systems. That's where the states can play a role in kind of pushing to have them implement this going forward. Over to Katie.
So Katie, one question that came to you specifically in the chat, Carl already answered it, but they wanted to hear your response. What would you recommend for a market solution to ensure that certain states only get CFE without the additional costs? I think they were specifically wondering about a situation in Washington State.
Okay, thank you. I think I don't know the specifics on the Washington State issue that was being referenced here. I think going back actually to Sean's comment, I think one of the most important things right now from sort of a fairness and equity across the systems is making sure that we are harmonizing our transition towards these more granular accounting tools so that we don't have double counting happening and that, we have people ready. And I think, Sean, you said it very well, which is it's not a technology issue, it's a governance issue. And I think figuring out how we can move this more seamlessly together so that everybody can experience the benefits of it and that we can do it in the least cost manner is both, a challenge and a real opportunity for us to come together.
Elliot, we have a number of questions still in the chat. Do we want to keep going over or are we at time? I'll look to guidance from you and Jessica.
No, we can continue and go a little bit over.
Okay. The one that's open to everyone, will 24/7 markets be able to act in place of PPAs or VPPAs to make a project fundable? Put another way, the questioner asks, how might we make revenue from 24/7 GC markets bankable so that lenders and investors will consider that revenue when funding new clean energy projects, given this revenue is variable and not contracted?
I'll start for a moment. I think one of the interesting pieces is what we anticipate to happen is we still expect people to sign PPAs and VPPAs, to meet, a significant amount of their demands. But the underlying accounting tool, we expect to eventually shift towards that greater granularity. And one of the pieces that we are really interested to see is what will be the price signals that will emerge as we actually start trading around where we have these holes in portfolios. So there may be places where there are merchant or uncontracted pieces of a VPPA or PPA that people might be able to bring into some of these emerging markets that will be being created, that I think is one opportunity in there for sure. But again, I would just remind everyone, I think it's just a different accounting aspect to how we look at the environmental attributes that are going to be created by these power purchase agreements and virtual power purchase agreements.
And to me, that covers the contracting side very well. On the vertically integrated side, all resource procurement measured by the hour. Open up your procurement system so everything's in there competing together, including the aggregation, the aggregated DERs and VPPs, just all of it. And then when you overlay the environmental attributes on that as something that's valued, then you can have an open competition in your vertically integrated world as well.
Okay. One more additional question that came up. There's a number of them in here. I'm trying to filter through them. Any of the panelists can talk about this. How does the concept of additionality play into these 24/7 processes?
To me, that's fairly easy to do because you just time match or you put your stamp on there, and then it's supply and demand. The people that care about additionality will want one time stamp, and then the ones that don't, well, there'll be a different time stamp. So to me, it's fairly easy to handle that, and the policy is that you just you put your date that the resource, you match the date that the resource goes commercial with the EAC, and then it's buyer's choice in terms of which dates they want.
Anyone else?
Add
Sean,
a
I think
nuance.
you-
And a nuance that, so we think, we're going to need new resources. If our ultimate goal is to help drive to a fully decarbonized grid, we're going to both need the existing and the new. And so we want to acknowledge and value the existing on the system, but we also need to have new. And so when you're tracking, it can get a little complicated when you think about how to account for the existing. And so in vertically integrated markets, it's relatively easy to take your load ratio share as a utility customer of the existing assets in the rate base and say that's your share, and then everything else has to be new on top of that. Elsewhere, it can be a little more complicated, but I think that's an important point. Technologically speaking, as Ted pointed out, it's easy to put a stamp on there and account for that. But it's a question of how much new do you need versus how much existing can you rely on over.
I think a constant undercurrent in this debate will be how much is enough. As everybody's mentioned, it's a transition. As Katie's charts show, there are holes. What today is an innovation, 10 years from now will be greenwashing. The system is moving. 20 years ago, it was innovation to buy a wreck from over here that was produced over there, and there's no deliverability. All of this is making a more rigorous system, but that will continue to develop over time. And a constant question will be, well, how much is enough? And of course, you don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good, and you want to make progress. I mean, that's a thing we all balance in all policy questions.
Like, if I could just jump in with one
Yeah.
thought, which is that, this doesn't have to look the same everywhere. States can have different policies. They can make somewhat different choices. We can make progress in different places dealing with additionality differently. But the fundamental, feature that we need to be developing is this standardized accounting on an hourly basis that's verifiable. Because ultimately, that's really what's going to make this as beneficial and affordable as possible, because that opens up free exchange across any seams that there might be, and any contributions from the demand side versus those that come from the supply side of the grid. So I think no matter where you are, you should be working towards hourly EACs that are accurate and verifiable. But I think that a lot of these decisions about how you design your tariff can be tailored to your situation. And the other thing I'd say too is that having this is mostly happening at this point by customers opting in, whether it's a city or whether it's a large commercial customer, but they're choosing to take this step. It's not a default service tariff to all utility customers to start off with. Some folks are stepping forward and saying, this is an important policy consideration for me. I want to make it work for me, knowing that, as Sean said, making it work for me is going to open it up to be available to others. So I think that's another way that you mitigate a lot of the risk on the ratepayer at large, is allowing those who are motivated to step forward to go ahead and do that.
So Carl, one of the questions in here, and you just brought this up, obviously we have to be adjusted at least to some of the needs of the specific states. How do you see this working in a deregulated state?
I would, so there's different flavors of deregulation, but let's just assume that there's fully restructured market, a Northeastern fully restructured market. I would just point you to, for shorthand, we had a really outstanding presenter from RPD Investments, I think it's called. His name is Eric Elam, and he did procurement for Iron Mountain. And I just thought he did a really great job of describing how they run their procurement in restructured markets. So I'd point you to that. And as Ted said, all of our stuff, and you can reach out to me and I can give you, direct you to where these things are posted from our project. But that's probably the easiest way to answer it right now.
Yeah, and as I recall, his fundamental solution was to take a chart like Katie's and then be out there in the procurement world trying to fill in the boxes that need to be filled in.
Yep.
So Stacey, in the General Service Administration for the federal government just issued an RFI last week for the PGM market, which is our largest market for retail choice. And so we're looking to go out with a competitive solicitation and have a retailer offer us 24/7, and they would be responsible for figuring out which resources to bring to the table to get us that match on an hourly basis, to track it and present us opportunities to increase it over.
Great, thank you. Let me end with one more here. This is a long one. How can 24/7 tariffs make the necessary data and price signals for which hours need investment transparent to the public in concert with what may be viewable in a public liquid spot market for EACs, especially when the qualification criteria for one utility's 24/7 tariff might not align with a 45V guidance and 3 pillars? Carl,
They found the hard part.
So Carl should go first. No.
They found the hard part, and
one thing I don't know if this fully answers the question, as other my panelists think about it and answer. But one thing that we really liked about the Energy Arkansas tariff, they characterize it as a cafeteria tariff. In other words, there were different options that customers could take advantage of within that tariff, depending on each individual customer's own clean energy goals. And you talk to the Googles, you talk to the Metas of the world, you talk to Walmart, they all have slightly different goals, right? And there was really a lot of flexibility in the Energy Arkansas tariff to allow each of their customers in this area to pick and choose a little bit, to tailor it to their own needs, which we really appreciated. Over.
Thank you. So I think we'll probably wrap it up since I know that we're 10 minutes over. I think what the takeaway of this is obviously tremendous amount of interest in the discussion. We're still at kind of the beginning stages of figuring out how we do need to adjust it for the different states' policies, what those are going to need, how we're going to make sure to balance those political needs and regulatory needs. So I want to thank everyone for their time today. I encourage everyone to pick up the RAP report for those of us that are going to be at NARUC at the end of the month. Also, as always, want to thank Jessica and Elliot for their support today. All of that I think they've put in the chat that's going to be posted online. I think all of the links they asked for are available there. Elliot, have I forgotten anything?
No, Commissioner, thank you again. We'll go ahead and post the recording and the slides as well. Thanks again to all our presenters and our moderator.
Thank you. Everybody have a great day.
thank you.
Take care.